Hi, everybody. I'm Lisa Fain, and I'm CEO of Center for Mentoring Excellence, and here in my capacity as ambassador to the International Mentoring Association Board for our interviews with mentoring experts. And I'm thrilled to be here today with Marsha Carr, whom I met at University of New Mexico Mentoring Institute many years ago. And we do much with the IMA board together right now. And Marsha is an award-winning educator who serves as the chair of the Educational Leadership Department at UNC Wilmington. During 35 years of service in private and public education, a decade as a public school superintendent, she was bestowed Teacher of the Year Award and recognized by the Maryland House of Delegates as well, and received the Maryland Governor's Citation for her work in school improvement, especially districts in distress. In '94, Marsha was honored with a National Milken Family Educator Award, which is really the most coveted award for educators. So we know we're dealing with the best of the best here. She served as a business consultant over the years to corporations who have been victimized by embezzlement, struggling startups and business innovators. She's the developer of 3 successful startups herself, including Edu-tell. Edu-tell LLC, which owns the registered trademark for self-mentoring, and we'll talk about self-mentoring a little bit more today. She specializes in mentoring and coaching and is an international consultant in self-mentoring, a leadership development program that she developed that's used throughout the US and England. She received the 2015 UNCW Start-Up Award and more recently the 2016 North Carolina Coastal Entrepreneur of the Year for professional service. She lives in North Carolina and in Utah. Welcome, Marsha.
Yes, thank you. And let me apologize for giving you such a long bio, because if I'd known you were going to read it, we could reduce that to just a couple sentences.
It's all good. It gives people good context. I am hoping that today we can talk about self-mentoring, because I did not know about this concept until we first met, and I'm really fascinated by it. So tell us a little bit, what is self-mentoring?
Well, self-mentoring, there's 2 ways to answer. First of all, I can give you the very formal definition that I actually had to use whenever I was getting the registered trademark. And the other is just the practical application of how it evolved and how it came out. So the formalized definition is it really is just an individual, and it doesn't matter gender, age, race, anything, ethnicity, being able to just take charge of your life, being accountable, being responsible, and setting some very, very direct expectations that you have for yourself in order to succeed, and then living that out.
I love it.
Informal part of that is that goes back to how it began, Lisa. And I left public education, and I was a public school superintendent, as you shared, and was looking for something different. And I had had 10 years, which I always feel are dog years when it comes to serving as a superintendent. So it was like, it felt like 100 years, 70 years. And I was just looking for something different. And I read a Time magazine article, I'll never forget, it listed the top 10 least stressful jobs in the US. And I had just come from what I felt was the most stressful. So I was looking for something that was least. And at the very top of that list, they listed college professor. Now, I've since found that to be very inaccurate, and I can't find that list to complain to who it was who actually published that and didn't have their facts correct. But so I thought, you know what, that's a perfect transition for me. I'm not ready to go out to pasture yet. I kind of want to do something else. And I thought, oh, this will be great. So I ventured into higher education, unbeknown to me that the culture of some higher education institutions, not all, can be one of isolation. You know, people are very cutthroat, and you need to do your own thing and leave me alone and all that. And the culture that I'm in right now has significantly changed. But when I arrived there 10 years ago, it was a completely different culture. And I was given a mentor, and my mentor literally wanted nothing to do with me. And it became very obvious to me that I wasn't going to make it through my first year, because every time I asked my mentor something, he was unable to answer, or he just ignored me. So I was like, okay, well, this isn't working. And so self-mentoring was born from that. So it was just the idea of, I had to sit down and I thought, okay, what do I need to do to be successful this year? And then I don't have that expertise, so I got to find people that have it. And there's people that have expertise in research. There's people that have quantitative and qualitative expertise, so I can pull them. And I can pull people from here because I need expertise on this. And I needed legions of individuals with different expertise that I could call upon. The one thing that I found that was fascinating with higher education, that if you offer to take someone and buy them coffee, they feel very indebted to you, so they'll help you out. So I moved it up to meals, and I would buy lunch. And when I bought lunch, I got them for like the whole year. So I started, it was a pricey my first year.
Yeah.
But I developed a legion of individuals, and I manipulated my way through that year with the expertise of others because I didn't have it. At the end of the year, they were doing a mentoring conference, and someone came up to me and said, oh, you're one of the newbies. We're doing a mentoring conference. Do you want to present? Because I know you got to do so many presentations to get through tenure and all that. And I was like, mentoring? I had the most horrible experience in mentoring. I'm like the last person that should be presenting at a mentoring conference. And I said to her, well, let me think about it. I just want to give it some thought. And then I did think about it. And I came back to her and I said later, I do want to present. And she said, well, what's your topic? And I said, well, my topic is on self-mentoring. And she said, well, I've never heard of it. And I said, well, it's cutting edge. It's on the forefront. I think your audience will like it. And I presented, and then it just took off. And so then I threw myself into research. I have students right now. I just had 3 students that completed dissertations in self-mentoring. So it's no longer my research. It's other people have got involved in the process, and we're now looking at their research. And with dissertations, they're so extensive and go on for so long. So it has a whole lot more teeth. And I believe in it solely. And I also don't see it as, I see it as side by side with mentoring and coaching. I see it as, if you've got a successful toolkit, it's going to have all 3 of them in it, because everybody needs at least one of those at some point in their life. And most of the time they need all, or at least a couple. And so it doesn't replace mentoring, because mentoring is extremely effective, and self-mentoring doesn't work in every situation. But obviously mentoring may not in some. And so it's learning how to align people up with what they specifically need at that point in their life, which could change from week to week or month to month, or at any point you look at it.
Yeah, there's so much that stands out in what you said. I mean, one of them is this idea of knowing yourself is always the precursor to good mentoring, right? And self-mentoring really requires that, even and takes it up another level in terms of really having a process around it. And there are formal steps to self-mentoring as well. I know that there's several steps in the model. Before we get to those, the other thing that struck me about what you said is that you pull knowledge from other people that you know you need. And so, some people might hear the name self-mentoring and think, well, it's lonely, isolated, right? And it's just all about me. But there's actually a role for other people there. And there's even some mentoring within self-mentoring of learning from these folks who have knowledge that you don't have. So when you say you pull from other people, how do you figure out who you need to be pulling from? And what do you do with it once you get them on board?
Yeah, great question. I think for me in that particular situation, what I pulled from was I just asked. I did research as far as little r, not big R, as far as who out in the field was considered expertise in the areas I was looking at. It took me a while to figure out, when it came to actually conducting studies, that I really didn't like quantitative. I hated the math. I just wasn't good at it. So I decided to focus on qualitative. So I started looking at qualitative researchers, people that were doing things in the field with an expertise. And I just would reach out. My first book contract, my first year, I got a book contract because I happened to naively reach out to a gentleman that was at the University of Virginia that turned out to be this big guru in school reform, I had no clue who he was. I was new to the field and figuring things out. And I just sent him an email and said, hey, I do work in the topic. I'm a superintendent or a former superintendent, and I'm very intrigued by what you do. And he emailed me back, and we ended up having this conversation, and he's like, oh, I'm going to do this book. Do you want to join me? I'm like, okay. And so most people probably would have been intimidated to contact him to try to get I wasn't contacting him to get a book deal, but most people would have been a little intimidated to even contact him, period. I was too naive to know what I was doing. And so that was an example of where I got lucky. But I just emailed people. I called people and I invited them out. Starbucks was one of my favorite places because everybody was agreeable to meet at Starbucks. I don't know if I can actually plug Starbucks on this, but so I invited them out to a coffee shop. And so we would just meet and talk. And there were times, Lisa, that I met with individuals that it just didn't click. It didn't matter that they had that expertise. I just didn't know. I just didn't feel comfortable with them. An example is I have a great comfort with you. From the time I first met you, I've had a comfort with you. So that would be high on my priority list as far as I had to have a comfort. Then I'd figure out what your expertise was and then what I could ask you for. And then if there was anything I could do in return. So it's kind of like a two-way partnership if I had anything to contribute.
There's a great TED Talk that a new friend of mine just came out with called, her name's Tracy Savadago, and I'll send it to you and I'll link it in the notes below and I'll tag her. But it's all about talking to strangers and what you're talking about and the importance of talking to people and learning from them and really, you never know what connections you're going to make. And what you're talking about really resonates with that as well, because in self-mentoring, I think you have to go where the energy is and, see where there's a click and keep trying and not be burdened with, too much information about the who's who. What would you say, because we're now in this virtual world, we're recording this at the end of May, where both of us are staying at home and conducting business through, it makes it hard to buy a cup of coffee and really hard to buy lunch, right? So yeah. How do you pull other people in when you can't use the power of caffeinating them or feeding them?
Well, actually, I'm doing it with a glass of wine right now. So what I normally do is just ask if I can meet with them over a glass of wine. Of course, they have to supply it on their end and I supply it on my end. But we meet very informally and sit and drink our wine together and talk about the topic. So I haven't really noticed a difference in still connecting with people because people still want to connect and people are still interested in helping each other. I haven't really met anyone who shut the door and said, no, I'm not going to help you. Mm-hmm. I've had people who said, I'm not sure I'm the person you need, or I'm not sure my expertise is at the level you need, but why don't you talk to this person? I met Bob Garvey in the UK, who I consider one of the best in the field. And I never met Bob. I met David Cutterfield, who came to one of my presentations at the University of New Mexico at the Mentoring Institute. And it was a packed session. And he came up to me at the end and said, you have got to meet my friend, Bob Garvey. He will love you and you will love him. And he said, let me have your card. And he takes off. And I'm thinking, yeah, I'll never hear from him again, because sometimes people do that and they don't follow up. And the next thing I know, I get an email from Bob Garvey, and we never had a face-to-face. He was in London and I was here, or he was north of London in York. But at some point, I wrote a grant so I could go visit him in person and took him out to lunch. And then he eventually came to the US. I have been back and forth and worked with him probably 2 or 3 times a year, every year until more recently. So there's all kinds of mysterious ways for it to happen. Sometimes you can plan them and sometimes you can't. You just have to be open for them to happen.
Yeah. So here's what I struggle with, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are. Sometimes I get these emails from people, and somebody who's in the mentoring field, I'm always open to talking to people. And yet lately I've been getting a lot of, can I pick your brain for this? Can I pick your brain for this? Can I pick your brain from this, from people I've never heard of? And I struggle with this desire to be helpful. And this, if everybody's picking my brain, what am I, first of all, I'm not going to have much brain left. And second of all, I've also got stuff I got to do. So what do you say to people who are in situations like that, who get asked frequently for their guidance of how do you choose when there's a relationship to be had or when there's some kind of transaction?
Oh, that's such a good question. And I don't even know if I can answer that. I'd almost have to reflect on that for a while. My instinct is to say that, or is to respond in the way that I do it now. And I do filter. Like when someone sends me something, I kind of have a 1 to 10 scale, and I try to figure out where they fall. And I may send them to the International Mentoring Association site as a resource. I may provide them with other resources. I actually have a page that has resources on it. And because sometimes it's very generic what they're looking for. It's not specific to what my expertise may be, but I still want to be helpful. And then if they make it up my 1 to 10 scale and above 5, and especially if they get up to a 7 or 8, then I might actually say, can we do a Zoom meeting? I'd like to talk to you a little bit more. You've intrigued me. I think I might have something for you. I've recommended people just buy the self-mentoring book. Like, hey, I'd love to talk to you about it, but read the book and then we can talk. And I'll be happy to help you with it, because you're right. There's not sufficient time in a day to do all of that. So you do have to kind of sort through it. But I guess it's such an interesting question, because I think I have intuitively kind of processed through it. And I have never thought about how I do it until you asked me.
I just thought you might have some ideas. Okay, back to self-mentoring. Sorry, that was very self-serving, but I really wanted to know what your answer was. So talk a little bit about the steps to self-mentoring, if you would, Marsha.
Sure. There are 4 levels, and until you complete one level, you shouldn't go to the next. Any time when we've been doing research or doing studies, when somebody skipped a level, they were not successful. But if and that was kind of a rude awakening for us, because I don't know that at the very beginning, I just identified what I'd kind of been through and then started looking at it as a research model. But it became very obvious that the first level was critical. And so the first level is actually called self-awareness. And you kind of alluded to this earlier, Lisa, when you were talking about getting to know yourself. That's what mentoring is all about. You have to know yourself, and coaching even more, because when you have a coach, they're being a mirror, and all they're doing is reflecting back on you. So when it comes to self-awareness, one of the first activities that I do if I'm in a face-to-face training environment, and actually I guess I have done this online, come to think of it, but I asked individuals to make a list of their 10 top attributes. And normally we're talking about leadership attributes, or attributes that help them be successful in the setting or environment that they're in. And then they're to rank order those. And then they are to put their rank order list to the side, and they're to take the random list that they created at the beginning, and they go to 3, 5, however many people they pick, friends, and they don't tell their friends what the list is, but they ask their friends to take a look at the list and to identify attributes that they feel that they themselves have, and to add any or cross out any that are incorrect, and just to give it back to them when they're done. And they pick friends that will be honest with them. And they do this, and then they collect the information, because now they have data. And the whole purpose of that is that the way they see themselves is often not the way their friends are seeing them. Sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad. When I did this activity myself for the first time, my ego took a huge hit, because I saw myself as charismatic, very charismatic and very organized and structured and get things done on time and just a ball of fun. My friends came back and they were like that I was OCD and that everything had to be done my way. And they had all these characteristics and I was mortified.
Woo.
And then I had to kind of reflect on it and realize that, well, wait a minute, these are still positive attributes. I just have to use these in a positive way. And I have to be aware that that's how I come across. And one of my friends even said that I could be intimidating, which floored me. So there's no better way to get to know yourself than to see yourself through someone else's eyes, and especially through friends who are going to be honest with you. And I began at that point. That was my starting point, was, okay, so if this is my perception, then am I happy with it? And if I am, then great. And if I'm not happy with it, then what parts of that do I want to focus on, or do I want to soften, or do I need to be stronger, or how do I want that to work? And so in the self-awareness stage, it really is you just getting to know yourself, but it's you getting to see yourself through the eyes of other individuals. Mm-hmm. And until you do that, I think it's really hard to set expectations for yourself. It just becomes critical. So the next level is moving into self-development. And the self-development level then is really you just setting an expectation for yourself. And we call them expectations. We don't call them goals, because goals become more structured and you can fail at reaching a goal. So the reason we call it expectations is you just expect yourself to kind of do this, and you'll expect yourself to do better or less, and it just is softer. It's a little easier when it comes to going through the maneuver. And in the self-development stage, you'll set that expectation for yourself. And with that, you will determine a timeline and what kind of data you're going to collect. In other words, how will you know if you're successful? What is going to be the measurement tool? Because that becomes very important to knowing if you are getting close to being successful. Have you been successful? If you haven't been, what's the obstacle? It's almost like a self-coaching model, if you think of it. And from that, you move into the self-reflection stage. And during that stage, you are taking the data that you've collected during self-development, and you're now reflecting on it, because the reflection is so critical. So when you look at that, how close did you get to the expectation? Some of those that self-coaching process I was talking about, that becomes the self-reflection stage. And then in self-monitoring, it is, if you have met this expectation, is it something is now embedded in your behavior and you don't have to worry about it? Or are you going to have to monitor this? Are you going to have to come back every month, put a little tag on your calendar and say, ooh, am I still doing this? Am I still on target? Mm-hmm. So that's pretty much the process. But again, that self-development stage, and we have a lot of different activities that I use in that, but that is an example, just one, but they're all activities to just make you aware of who you are.
That's spectacular. Self-awareness, self-development, self-monitoring. What's the fourth?
The third is self-reflection, and the
self-reflection. Yeah. It's like, the thing that goes through my head is it's like, it's a plan for the self that's not supposed to sit on the shelf, right? I mean, it's really, there's an activeness to it.
Yes.
They say, progress comes from action, not from thinking. Yeah. Right. And I like that you really built this in there as well. Yeah. What's the most common question you get from people about self-mentoring?
I think I don't know if it's a question, but the most startling statement that is made to me all the time is that people will say, well, I've been doing this my whole life. Like, I just didn't have a name for it.
Didn't know what it was. Yeah.
And I wasn't actually they normally will say they were only doing levels 2, 3, and 4. They weren't doing level 1. Level 1 seems to be the one thing that people are kind of out of touch with, because they think they know themselves already. They feel pretty solid. So they immediately just go into more like goal setting. And then when people learn more about the process, they realize, well, maybe I wasn't actually doing self-mentoring, but I was doing a form of like an informal way of self-mentoring. So it's kind of interesting. So I don't know that there's actually a question. I think it's more like it's just that revelation that, oh, I've been doing this my whole life. It's like,
Yeah.
I was a born self-mentor.
100%. The self-awareness thing is so huge. And, we think that we know ourselves until when we keep that awareness in our head, it's never accurate. I love this exercise that you talk about, those 10 attributes, because getting that feedback is so good. I have one that I use when I do executive coaching called Trolling for Insights. It's very, very similar. It's 3 set questions of, what do I do well? What do I need to do more of? What would you have me change for my own sake?
Oh yeah, nice.
You get the same kind of things. I did it myself years ago, and it was transformational. And like you said, sometimes it feels like a little bit of like, whoa, I didn't realize that. But that's what all growth starts from self-awareness. And even in the more traditional mentoring context, we talk a lot about preparation, about you gotta take the time to get to know who you are, what you bring to the relationship, and what you want from it before you even step foot in a meeting with your mentor.
Yeah.
So it's huge, huge, huge,
Oh,
huge.
Absolutely agree. I think the hardest thing is putting your ego on the shelf. It's like, because when I started getting information back, I actually thought about just getting new friends, and it was going to be less damaging.
Good point, yeah.
But I think that's the most difficult. And I think it's difficult for most people. I think that they shy away from that because sometimes if you feel somewhat confident, knowing that people might not see you like that could destroy your confidence, your efficacy, self-efficacy. So it's, no, I don't want to know. I'm good. I'm in my nice little world here. I'm very comfortable. I also think it's interesting that I have observed individuals that have gone through that activity that we're talking about. And when they got feedback from other people, that feedback was so much more positive that activity alone gave them confidence to continue on through the process. It was amazing. So it can go either way. For me, I clearly had too much confidence in who I was. And so it was kind of like, smack, come back to earth.
You know what? I bet, Marsha, this is what we do, that we high achieving women in particular, is I bet that there were some positive gems in there that you just plain old skipped over because you saw the negative stuff and you fixated on that. Like, these people, they don't get me. What's wrong with them? And then I'm sure there were some beauties in there about who you are and what you give to friendships and things like that you skipped right over, because this is what we do, is we ignore the positive feedback. You can get 10 A's and 1 B and you focus on the B, right? It's like the same in any kind of self-development. So I bet there was some good stuff in there too, but you're right. Ego, it's really important to balance your ego as well. So we are so fortunate that we work in this great organization, IMA, with so many colleagues doing such great stuff on mentoring. And I'm so excited to hear that your self-mentoring research is now cascading on to future generations as well. What are you most excited about that's happening in the world of mentoring?
This is going to seem trivial maybe, but probably I'm most excited right now for mentoring because the International Mentoring Association is building such a force. It's taking a front row stand. You're doing these interviews. There are so many committees right now, and they all have major projects. I'm working on the Speakers Bureau, which I will get that to you in a week or two. I actually have it into a pretty good model. I'm working on forms. But there are so many great things happening right now in the organization itself. And when I first came into the organization, we were kind of on wobbly legs, and we're trying to figure out who we were and where we were going. And normally in an organization, it takes a couple of years to build that up. And we took off quick. And we not only took off very rapidly, but we took off competently as well. The projects that we're taking on are phenomenal. I'm also working on the toolkit. There are so many good things. And I think that now that I have some place to recommend when people are looking for resources to IMA, and there's going to be a toolkit, there'll be a speakers bureau, there's, the every other year conference. There are a host, the webinars have increased. There's such a host of activity right now that we are becoming a very valuable resource to the world. And to me, that's the greatest thing that's happening in mentoring for me, because I'm pretty excited to see that happening. And it's a resource. We just didn't have that resource. They were all over the place. And you yourself, you have your own business. You do a lot of work in mentoring. So there's all these things cropping up right now to support people who embrace mentoring, know the importance of it, and what it can do to help individuals.
Yeah, it's so exciting. It's so exciting. All right. So what's the best way for people to find you if they want to get in touch with you?
The best way to find me, my website is down right now for self-mentoring. And so the best way to find me is just to email me, or I'm on Twitter, I monitor it, I have Facebook. I mean, they literally can use any social media, I don't care. Any social media, email, Google me, they'll be different. My email will come up, they can find me. And I'm happy to talk to individuals.
Perfect. Well, we'll list some of your social media handles in the notes below this one's listed on YouTube. And what a joy to be talking to you, Marsha. Thank you for your time. Thanks for your scholarship in self-mentoring and for all you do for IMA.
Yay, thank you.
Thank you.